In today's video, we're going to share an absolutely incredible story that will leave you speechless. Let's meet Xiomara Leon, a woman who went through a near-death experience and came back with stunning revelations about the future of our planet. What she saw and discovered will completely change her perspective on what is to come. So, get ready for a chilling journey. And of course, before we dive into this powerful story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any videos, and leave a like, which helps us a lot to continue bringing impactful content like this. Now, let's get down to business. Hello, my name is Xiomara Leon. Today I'm here to share with you a story that completely changed the course of my life. It is a story of pain, transformation, and above all, hope. I was born and raised in Hanko, a small coastal town in Finland. It's a beautiful place, you know, with quiet beaches and dense forests that seem to embrace the city. But unfortunately, the beauty around me wasn't enough to stop my childhood from being marked by deep insecurities. Since I was little, I was constantly criticized about my body. My family, well, they thought they were protecting me, preparing me for the outside world. But the truth is that every comment, every look of disapproval, was hurting me inside. Little by little, I began to absorb the idea that I would never be good enough, never worthy of being loved. It's funny how words can have so much power, isn't it? Especially when we are children. This feeling of inadequacy accompanied me throughout my youth. I felt like I was carrying an invisible weight, always trying to prove myself, always trying to fit in. And it was in this fragile emotional state that, at 16, I met Carlos. Carlos was my first boyfriend. At first, his attention made me feel special for the first time in my life. But what seemed like love soon turned into a nightmare. The relationship lasted 9 long years marked by physical and emotional abuse. Carlos drank a lot, and when he was under the influence of alcohol, he became violent. And I, with my self-esteem destroyed, believed that I deserved that it was my fault for not being good enough for him. It was in this context that, at the age of 21, I received a diagnosis that would change everything: stomach cancer. At the time, I didn't understand how this could be happening to me. After all, I have always taken care of my health. But today, looking back, I can see how the chronic stress and abuse I suffered was affecting my body in ways I never even imagined. And it was like that, fighting cancer and trapped in an abusive relationship, that I arrived on that fateful night. The night that changed everything. The night I almost died, but also the night I really started to live. It is about that night and what happened afterwards that I want to tell you now. It was a particularly cold night in Hanko. I was asleep when Carlos arrived home, more drunk than usual. I don't know exactly what happened next. All I remember is being woken up abruptly and, in the next instant, feeling pain so intense that it felt like my body was being ripped in half. The attack was so violent that I lost consciousness. And it was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, I no longer felt any pain. In fact, I no longer felt my body. I opened my eyes and saw myself floating above the bed. Down below, I could see my inert body, with Carlos next to me in a panic. The next scene is like a blur in my memory. I remember flashing lights, agitated voices, the sound of a siren. I was in the hospital, but not as a patient. It was as if I were an invisible observer, floating above everything and everyone. I saw the doctors and nurses fighting to keep me alive. Their voices were urgent. Their hands moved with impressive speed. "We're losing her," I heard someone shout. It was strange. I could see my body there, pale and still, but I didn't feel connected to it. I felt no fear, no pain, no worry. Instead, I felt a deep peace wash over me. It was as if, for the first time in my life, I was truly safe. All the weight I carried, the childhood insecurities, the abuse, the cancer, all of it seemed to be left behind, along with my physical body. And then, something even more incredible happened. A light began to form around me. It wasn't an ordinary light, you know. It was something alive, pulsating. It started as a small golden dot and grew until it completely enveloped me. Within that light, I felt loved in a way I had never experienced before. It was an unconditional, pure love that seemed to come from all directions at once. At that moment, I understood that everything I had been through, all the pain, all the suffering, had a greater purpose. It was in this state of complete peace and love that I saw two figures approaching. As they got closer, I could recognize them. They were my grandparents, who had passed away many years ago. They were radiant, young, full of life. Their smiles were so welcoming that I wanted to run into their arms like I did as a child. My grandparents didn't speak, not in words at least, but I could understand everything they wanted to tell me. They showed me that I was in a place where I could choose, stay with them, or return to my body. I also had a vision of the future of the planet. I was shown that there is a group of beings who want control of the Earth and that there will be a huge blackout. I also saw food shortages and chaos, but after all that, the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. A great movement of fraternity and love leading to the reconstruction of the planet with harmony, abundance, and peace. It was at that moment that I received a revelation that would change my life forever. They showed me that the cancer I carried was the result of years of accumulated stress, fear, and anxiety. These negative feelings had taken root in me, manifesting as physical illness. I then understood that, to truly heal, I needed to free myself from these emotional ties. I needed to learn to love myself, to forgive myself, to accept myself as I was. And most importantly, I needed to understand that I deserved a life of love and happiness. The decision was not easy. Part of me wanted to stay in that place of infinite peace with my grandparents, but something inside me knew that I still had a lot to do on Earth. There were lessons to learn, experiences to live, people to help. When I made my choice to return, I felt as if all the light in the universe was surrounding me, filling me. At that moment, I knew that when I returned, the cancer would no longer exist. I felt deep healing happening, not just in my body, but in my soul. And so gently, I was brought back to my body. I opened my eyes in the hospital, surrounded by astonished doctors. To them, I had just returned from cardiac arrest. For me, I had been reborn. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, the first thing I noticed was the look of shock on the faces of the doctors and nurses around me. I could hear murmurs of impossible and miracle. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore from the breathing tube that had been removed. A nurse came over, held my hand, and said in a shaky voice, "Welcome back, Mrs. Leon. You gave us quite a scare." I wanted to tell her about the light, about my grandparents, about everything I had experienced, but the words wouldn't come. In the days that followed, I underwent a series of tests. The doctors were perplexed. Not only had I survived a brutal attack and cardiac arrest, but there was also no sign of the stomach cancer that had been plaguing me for months. I remember the oncologist coming into my room, holding my exams in his hands, shaking. "Mrs. Leon," he said, "I don't know how to explain it, but your cancer just disappeared. There are no traces of it in your body." I smiled, because I knew exactly what had happened. During my near-death experience, I had been healed not only physically, but spiritually. The darkness that lived inside me, fueling the cancer, had been dispelled by the light I experienced on the other side. But the cure went beyond cancer. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The insecurities that had haunted me since childhood, the constant fear, the feeling of being unlovable, all of that had melted away. As I recovered physically, this feeling of peace and lightness only increased. It was like I was seeing the world with new eyes. The colors seemed more vivid, the sounds clearer. I could feel a deep connection to everything around me, something I had never experienced before. Doctors, of course, were looking for scientific explanations for what had happened to me. They talked about spontaneous remission, about previous diagnostic errors. But I knew the truth. I knew I had experienced something that went beyond current scientific understanding. While I was still in the hospital, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would leave Carlos. The near-death experience showed me that I deserved better, that I was worthy of love and respect. When he came to visit me, nervous and remorseful, I looked him in the eyes and said, "It's over, Carlos. I forgive you, but our relationship ends here." It was a moment of liberation. The words came out of my mouth with a strength and conviction I had never felt before. I saw the shock on his face, but for once I didn't care about his reaction. I was focused on myself, on my healing, on my future. In the weeks that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, I began to plan my new life. I knew I couldn't go back to the same routine as before, to the same environment that had made me sick for so long. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild my life from scratch. It was at that moment that the idea of moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico came up. It was a place I only knew from photos and stories, but something inside me said that was where I should go. Santa Fe, with its rich spirituality and welcoming atmosphere, seemed like the perfect place to start over. When I was finally released from the hospital, I was a completely different person than the one I had walked in on weeks before. Physically healed, emotionally renewed, and spiritually transformed. I was ready to embrace my second chance at life, ready to fully live each moment. I left the hospital not just as a survivor, but as someone who had been reborn. My near-death experience wasn't just about escaping physical death. It was about awakening to true life. And I was determined to honor that gift, that second chance, by living each day with gratitude, love, and purpose. The first few months after my near-death experience were, to say the least, challenging. I was euphoric, feeling like I was still connected to the other side. But at the same time, I had difficulty readjusting to everyday life. I soon realized that my sensitivity had heightened in ways I never imagined possible. It was as if all my senses were amplified. The colors seemed more vibrant, the sounds clearer. But most impressive, and often overwhelming, was my newfound emotional sensitivity. I could feel the emotions of those around me as if they were my own. Entering a place full of people was an intense and often exhausting experience. Joy, sadness, anger, fear. It all hit me in waves, sometimes leaving me confused about which emotions were really mine. I remember one time I went to the supermarket and had to run out, leaving my cart behind. The emotions of all those people, the stress of the cash register, the irritation of a mother with her crying child, the anxiety of someone counting coins to pay for their groceries. All of it hit me at once, leaving me nauseated and disoriented. Sleeping also became a challenge. My dreams were vivid, almost as real as my waking experiences. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, not knowing if I was in the physical world or on some other plane of existence. Additionally, I felt disconnected from my own body. After experiencing the freedom of existing without physical limitations, returning to a body that bled when cut, that felt pain and fatigue, was strange and sometimes frustrating. I had to relearn basic things like controlling the strength I used to hold objects. In the first few days after leaving the hospital, I broke several glasses and plates because I couldn't correctly judge the pressure needed to hold them. My relationship with time has also changed drastically. Sometimes minutes seemed to stretch into hours, other times hours passed in the blink of an eye. This distortion in the perception of time made it difficult to maintain a routine or keep commitments. But the most significant challenge was trying to explain my experience to the people around me. When I talked about the light, about my grandparents, about the feeling of peace and unconditional love I had experienced, I saw a mixture of fascination and disbelief in people's eyes. Some thought I was confused due to the trauma. Others thought I had gone crazy. My family in particular had a hard time accepting my transformation. They were happy that I had survived, of course, but they didn't know how to deal with this new Xiomara who spoke of spiritual experiences and demonstrated a wisdom that seemed beyond my years. I remember a particularly difficult conversation with my mother. She looked at me with teary eyes and said, "Xiomara, we're glad you're okay, but you're not the same anymore. It's like my daughter died that night and someone else came back in her place. His words hurt me, but I understood. In fact, I was no longer the same. The insecure and fearful Xiomara had been left behind. In her place was a woman who had experienced something beyond this world, who had been touched by an unconditional love that completely transformed her perspective on life. It was during this period that I began to learn to control my new sensitivity. I discovered that meditation helped me create an energetic shield, protecting myself from other people's emotions when necessary. I learned to ground myself, to connect with the earth when I felt very ethereal. Little by little, I found a balance. I learned to navigate between the spiritual world I had experienced and the physical world I had returned to. I began to see my heightened sensitivity not as a burden, but as a gift that allowed me to understand and help others in a unique way. This period of adjustment, although challenging, was crucial to my journey. It was during these months that I solidified my decision to move to Santa Fe and start a new life. I knew I needed an environment that embraced my new reality, a place where I could explore my spirituality without judgment. As I prepared for this big change, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was leaving behind everything I knew, my hometown, my family, my friends. But I knew, deep in my heart, that it was the right path to take. Looking back, I see that these initial challenges were essential to my growth. They forced me to confront my new reality, accept my changes, and learn to live in this world with one foot on the other side. Each obstacle overcome made me stronger, more sure of myself and my purpose. And so, with a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of hope, I boarded a plane headed to Santa Fe, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. The arrival of my first son, Lucas, was a moment of pure magic. Giving birth was an intense experience that, in some ways, reminded me of my NDE. The pain, the fear, the feeling of being on the edge between two worlds. And then suddenly, an explosion of love so pure and unconditional that it seemed to come directly from that light I had experienced years ago. Holding Lucas in my arms for the first time was like holding a piece of heaven. I looked at her perfect little face and felt a connection so deep that it went beyond this physical world. At that moment, I understood that becoming a mother would be my next great journey of growth and learning. The first few months were a roller coaster of emotions. The indescribable joy of seeing Lucas's first smile, the tiredness of sleepless nights, the constant fear of not doing enough or the right thing. My heightened sensitivity, which was still a challenge in everyday life at times, has become a blessing in motherhood. I could feel Lucas's needs before he even expressed them, creating an almost telepathic rapport between us. David was a wonderful father from day one. Seeing him with Lucas, so kind and loving, healed the last wounds I still carried from my past. Together we formed a family that I always dreamed of having, but never believed was possible. 2 years later, our family grew again with Sophia's arrival. If Lucas was my little piece of heaven, Sophia was my ray of sunshine. Vibrant, happy, and full of energy from day one, she brought a new dynamic to our family. Motherhood has taught me lessons that no spiritual experience could have taught me. I learned about patience, about unconditional love, about the strength we don't know we have until we need it. Each challenge, each sleepless night, each smile and hug from my children transformed me a little more. But being a mother also brought to the surface fears and insecurities that I thought I had overcome. I often found myself worried about repeating my parents' mistakes, about not being good enough for my children. It was at these times that my near-death experience became my anchor. I remembered the unconditional love I had felt from the other side, and I knew that was the love I wanted to give my children. Not a love based on expectations or conditions, but a love that accepted and celebrated who they truly were. As Lucas and Sophia grew up, I began to notice that they also seemed to have a special sensitivity. Luke, in particular, often talked about seeing brilliant people that no one else could see. At first, this scared me a little. But then I remembered the words of Maria, my mentor. "Your children are gifts from the universe, Xiomara. They came with their own gifts and purposes." I then decided to create an environment where Lucas and Sophia could freely explore their spirituality. I taught them meditation techniques adapted for children, told them stories about different spiritual traditions, and always encouraged them to trust their intuitions. Seeing my children grow up with such a natural and fearless spiritual connection made me realize how much I had changed. The Xiomara from before would have tried to repress these manifestations, fearing the judgment of others. But now, I celebrated their every spiritual discovery as a precious gift. Motherhood has also led me to expand my healing work. I started offering workshops for mothers, teaching techniques for energetic connection with their children and spiritual self-care. Seeing other mothers find peace and strength through these practices has brought me a new layer of fulfillment. Of course, not everything was rosy. There were moments of doubt, of extreme tiredness, of heated discussions with David about the best ways to raise children. But each challenge became an opportunity for growth. Each obstacle, a chance to practice the love and understanding I had experienced during my NDE. One of the most profound lessons I learned from motherhood was about impermanence. Watching my children grow so quickly, going from helpless babies to curious, personality-filled children, constantly reminded me of how precious and ephemeral life is. This has led me to an even greater appreciation of each moment. I tried to be fully present, whether it was a lazy afternoon in the park, a finger painting session in the kitchen, or even on nights when I needed to comfort a sick child. Every moment I realized was sacred in its own way. As Lucas and Sophia grew up, our house became a refuge not only for our family, but for friends, neighbors, and even strangers who were somehow drawn to our home. People said they felt peace when they walked into our house, that there was something special in the air. I knew it was the result of the love and spirituality we cultivated daily. As my children entered school age, I faced new challenges. How do I explain to them about my near-death experience? How do we help them navigate a world that doesn't always understand or accept spiritual experiences? I decided to be honest with them early on, adapting the story according to their ages. To my surprise, they accepted everything with a naturalness that left me impressed. To them, the idea that consciousness could exist beyond the physical body was not strange or scary. It was simply part of reality. Seeing the world through my children's eyes gave me new perspectives on my own experience. His innocent and profound questions made me reflect on aspects of my NDE that I had not yet fully considered. One day, Lucas, aged 7, asked me, "Mommy, if you could choose to come back, does that mean that all people who die choose to go?" The question took me by surprise and made me reflect deeply on free will, destiny, and the mysteries of life and death. These conversations with my children inspired me to start journaling about my reflections and experiences. It was not a book destined for publication, but rather a legacy that I wanted to leave for Lucas and Sophia, a way of sharing my spiritual journey with them in a more complete and profound way. As the years passed, I saw my family flourish in ways I never could have imagined. David continued his career as a cinematographer, gaining recognition in the film industry. I alternated between my work as a makeup artist, which I still deeply loved, and my growing energy healing practice. Lucas, now 12 years old, showed an incredible talent for music. His compositions had an ethereal quality that touched people deeply. Sophia, at 10, was a born artist, creating paintings that seemed to capture glimpses of other worlds. Seeing my children develop their own gifts and follow their unique paths filled me with indescribable joy and pride. I knew that no matter what life had in store for them, they had the spiritual and emotional tools to face any challenge. Motherhood taught me that the love I experienced during my NDE was not something distant or unattainable. It was something I could live and express every day, through the small actions and choices I made as a mother, wife, and human being. Looking back on the journey that brought me here, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Every challenge, every moment of pain, every joy, and every lesson shaped me and prepared me for this role as a mother, which I consider the most important and rewarding of my life. And as I look to the future, to the years to come with my children growing up and following their own paths, I feel a mixture of anticipation and serenity. I know that life will bring more challenges and more joy, But now I face everything with an open heart and an unshakable faith in the love that transcends even death. As the years passed and my children grew, I felt a growing urge to share my story more widely. It wasn't vanity or attention-seeking, but a deep feeling that my experience could bring comfort and hope to others. I started modestly, sharing my story in small support groups for people who had gone through similar experiences. Seeing the relief in the eyes of someone who had finally found someone who understood what they had been through was deeply rewarding. One day, after one of these meetings, a woman came to me with tears in her eyes. "Your story changed my life," she said. "I spent years feeling alone, thinking I was going crazy. Listening to you made me realize that what I experienced was real and meaningful." His words touched me deeply and made me realize that I had a greater responsibility. I couldn't keep my experience just to myself or a small circle of people. I needed to find a way to reach more people. It was then that I decided to turn my personal diary into a book. It wasn't an easy decision. Exposing my most intimate story to the world was scary. What if people didn't believe me? What if I were ridiculed, or worse, my family was negatively affected? I shared my concerns with David, who supported me unconditionally. "Your story is powerful, Xiomara," he told me. "It can change lives, and if it helps even one person, it will be worth it." With the support of my family, I started writing. The process was intense and emotional, reliving every detail of my experience. Putting into words sensations that seemed beyond human language was a huge challenge. But it was also incredibly therapeutic. It took me 2 years to finish the book. When I finally held the first printed copy in my hands, I felt a mixture of pride, fear, and anticipation. It was like I was giving a piece of my soul to the world. The launch of the book, titled Beyond the Light, My Journey Back to Life, was a surreal moment. Seeing my story on bookstore shelves, hearing people discussing my experience was both exciting and scary. Reactions were varied. Some embraced my story enthusiastically, finding hope and comfort in it. Others were skeptical, questioning the veracity of my experience. There were even those who accused me of making everything up for attention or money. Dealing with criticism was difficult at first, but I remembered what I had learned during my NDE. Unconditional love is not dependent on the approval of others. I stayed true to my truth, responding to criticism with understanding and compassion. The book ended up getting more attention than I expected. I was invited to give talks, participate in TV and radio programs, share my story at conferences on spirituality and consciousness. Every opportunity to talk about my experience was a chance to touch more lives, to spread a message of hope and love. One of the most memorable experiences was when I was invited to speak at a hospital, to a team of doctors and nurses who dealt with terminally ill patients on a daily basis. Sharing my story with them, seeing how it affected the way they approached death and cared for their patients was deeply rewarding. But not everything was rosy. The public exposure brought challenges that I had not anticipated. There were times when the pressure felt like too much, when I questioned whether I had made the right decision to share my story so openly. It was during one of those moments of doubt that I received a letter that changed everything. It was from a young woman who had attempted suicide and survived. She wrote that my book had found her at the darkest moment of her life, and that through my story, she had found a reason to keep living. Reading that letter made me cry for hours. I realized that no matter how much criticism or challenges I faced, if my story could save even one life, it would all be worth it. As the years passed and I continued to share my story, I found myself reflecting more and more on the meaning of life and death. My near-death experience had completely removed the fear of death, but at the same time, it had heightened my appreciation for life. I remember one day sitting in my garden, watching a hummingbird. Your life is so brief compared to ours, I thought. And yet how vibrant, how full of purpose he seems. I realized that the length of life is not as important as the intensity with which we live it. This reflection led me to a deeper understanding of what really matters. It is not material possessions, nor social status, nor even achievements that we take with us in the end. It's the love we share, the lives we touch, the difference we make in the world. I began to see life as a school, a place where we come to learn and grow. Every challenge, every relationship, every experience, good or bad, is an opportunity for evolution. Death, in this context, is not an end, but a transition, a graduation to the next level of existence. This perspective completely changed the way I lived my daily life. I've come to value the little moments more: a hug from my children, a cup of tea shared with David, the smile of a stranger on the street. Every interaction became an opportunity to spread love and light. At the same time, I became more aware of the impermanence of everything. Watching my children grow up so quickly, watching the seasons change, noticing the little wrinkles that were beginning to appear on my face, all of this constantly reminded me that our time here is brief. But instead of saddening me, this awareness of impermanence inspired me to live each moment fully. It made me want to enjoy every second with my loved ones, express my love and gratitude more often, forgive more easily. One of the most profound lessons I learned was about forgiveness. During my NDE, I experienced such unconditional love and acceptance that all the hurt and resentment I carried seemed to melt away. I realized that holding a grudge only hurts us, binds us to the past, and prevents us from living fully in the present. It led me to forgive people I never thought I could forgive. I forgave my parents for the criticism that hurt me as a child, understanding that they did the best they could with what they knew at the time. I forgave Carlos for the abuse, not to justify his actions, but to free myself from the weight of anger and resentment. Forgiveness has become a daily practice for me, not just forgiveness of others, but also self-forgiveness. I learned to be kinder to myself, to accept my imperfections and flaws as part of my growth journey. Another important reflection that emerged was about the purpose of life. Many people who came to me after reading my book or listening to my talks asked, "What's the point of all this? Why are we here?" My answer was always, to love and grow. I realized that each soul comes into this world with specific lessons to learn, with a unique purpose to fulfill. Our task is to discover this purpose and live it fully, always seeking to expand our capacity to love and understand. This understanding made me look at each person differently. Every human being, regardless of their actions or circumstances, is a soul on a journey, learning and evolving in their own way. This brought me a deeper compassion, a greater ability to see beyond appearances and connect with the divine essence in each person. As I deepened these reflections, I realized that my view of consciousness had changed drastically. Before my NDE, I viewed consciousness as something limited to the brain, something that began at birth and ended at death. Now, I understood it as something much greater, a force that permeates the entire universe and of which we are only an individualized expression. This expanded understanding of consciousness led me to explore deeper meditative practices. I began to experience altered states of consciousness that reminded me, however vaguely, of the expansion I felt during my NDE. These experiences reinforced my belief that there is much more to our existence than we can perceive with our physical senses. One day, during one of these deep meditations, I had a vision that had a profound impact on me. I saw the earth as a living, pulsating organism, and each human being as a cell in that organism. I realized that, just as the cells in our body work in harmony to maintain our health, we, human beings, have a responsibility to work together for the well-being of the planet and all the beings that inhabit it. This vision gave me a new perspective on the interconnectedness of all things. I began to understand that our actions, no matter how small, have an impact on the whole. A smile can brighten someone's day, who in turn can spread that light to others. Likewise, our daily choices, what we eat, how we treat the environment, how we interact with others, have repercussions that go far beyond what we can imagine. This understanding of interconnection led me to adopt a more conscious and sustainable lifestyle. I started paying more attention to my consumption choices, looking for options that were more beneficial for the planet. I began to value human relationships more, understanding that each interaction is an opportunity to create positive ripples in the fabric of reality. One of the visions that I was shown and that still worries me, is that of a huge global blackout. I saw a period of chaos and darkness, caused by those who seek to control the population through fear and scarcity. I saw people fighting for basic resources, communities fragmenting, a world on the brink of collapse. But what gives me hope is that I also saw what comes next. I saw people coming together, rediscovering their connection to the land and to each other. I saw the emergence of new ways of living, more sustainable and in harmony with the planet. I saw a reborn humanity, wiser, more compassionate, more aware of its true nature. I believe we are at a crucial choice point. The future we live will depend on the decisions we make now, individually and collectively. This is why I feel an urgency to share my message, to awaken people to their true nature and potential. In the coming years, I plan to expand my work in new ways. I am collaborating with scientists and researchers to develop more in-depth studies on NDEs and expanded states of consciousness. I believe that the more we understand these phenomena, the better we can integrate these experiences into our understanding of reality. I'm also working on a new book, this time focusing not just on my personal experience, but on the collective lessons we can learn from NDEs. I want to explore how these experiences can guide us to a new way of living, more aligned with our true nature. Additionally, I am developing training programs for healthcare professionals, educators, and business leaders, teaching them to incorporate the principles I have learned into their respective fields. I believe that by influencing these key areas of society, we can create a wave of positive change. One of my biggest hopes for the future is to see more people awakening to their own inner light. I believe that each of us has the potential to experience the kind of unconditional love and universal connection that I felt during my NDE. We don't need to have a near-death experience to access this wisdom. It's within each of us waiting to be discovered. I imagine a future where more people live from this place of love and connection. A future where our decisions, personal, professional, political, are guided not by fear or greed, but by a deep understanding of our interconnectedness and responsibility to each other and the planet. Of course, I know that this future will not arrive overnight. There will be obstacles, setbacks, moments of doubt and despair. Transformation is rarely a smooth, linear process, but every step in the right direction, no matter how small, brings us closer to that better future. And that's where I see my role, and the role of each of us. We are all agents of this change. Every act of kindness, every conscious choice, every moment of genuine connection is a seed planted for that better future. When I look at my children, now young adults following their own paths, I feel a mixture of pride and expectation. They grew up with an understanding of the world that I only came to have after my NDE. I see in them, and in many young people of their generation, a wisdom and awareness that gives me great hope for the future. As I grow older, I feel a growing peace about my own mortality. I know that when the time comes for me to make my final transition, I will be ready. There is no fear, just a calm curiosity about what comes next. But until then, I'm determined to live each day fully, to keep learning, growing, and sharing. Because if my near-death experience taught me anything, it's that every moment is precious, every interaction is an opportunity to spread light and love. And so I face the future with a mixture of realism and hope. I know there are challenges ahead, some that we may not even be able to imagine yet. But I also know that within each of us there is unlimited potential for love, creativity, and resilience. My expectation for the future is that more and more people will awaken to this truth. May we find ways to live in greater harmony with each other and the planet. May we learn to balance our technological development with our spiritual evolution. The other day I had a dream and I saw that September 5th will be fundamental in this transformation process. As the years passed, these reflections on life and death became the center of my work and my existence. They were no longer just abstract ideas, but living principles that guided every aspect of my life. And as I approached 50, I felt deep gratitude for every experience, every lesson, every moment that brought me here. Looking back at the journey that led me to these reflections, I feel a mixture of awe and humility. admiration for the wisdom that exists in each of us, waiting to be discovered, and humility before the mysteries of existence that, even after all these experiences and reflections, continue to surprise and amaze us. And as I look to the future, to the years I still have ahead of me, I feel an almost childlike excitement, because I know that every day brings new opportunities to learn, to love, to grow. Every moment is a chance to delve deeper into the mysteries of life and death, to expand my understanding, and to share that light with the world. Because in the end I realized that's what life is all about. Not to accumulate possessions or achievements, but to expand our capacity to love, to understand, to marvel at the miracle of existence. And death, far from being an end, is just a transition, a new chapter in this eternal journey of discovery and evolution.